Hey, how's it going, guys? Matt here from Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson, sitting here with Nick Culver. So we're going to be covering a topic today on the podcast that is a big trending topic in the motorsports world right now, and that is that Polaris sold off Indian motorcycles to a private equity company here in Los Angeles. And Nick and I are going to talk to you guys a little bit about what that means. We're going to speculate a lot, just like a lot of the other guys on the internet right now, just kind of give our take on it and our speculation about what could become of Indian motorcycles and what that means to the riders mostly. And, you know, maybe a little bit about like the business and what that means and some of the common practices of private equity and things that they do. Nick, what were your initial reactions on this whole news?
You know, I think that I had a similar initial reactions to most people, which is that it kind of sucks, you know, just in general. You know, obviously, you know, being a Harley-Davidson, you know, salesperson, obviously there's a potential upside to less competition in that very limited context. But the reality is that people work for Indian Motorcycle, and I'm a motorcyclist first, you know, and a member of the larger riding community. And I really appreciated the racing and the competition between the two brands. And I just think that everybody wins when the rider scene expands and when there's more interest and competition and rivalries and that kind of stuff tends to build that as a whole. And so between the more uncertain position of the people that work there and between the loss of competition and the loss of rivalry, which, you know, it sounds doom and gloom and we don't know for sure what's going to happen. But I think my initial reaction was probably similar to most people, which is like, you know, it's a shame.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think most people think that I'm going to come on here and say, oh, yeah, I make a bunch of jokes about Indian and stuff, because obviously I've made plenty of videos poking fun at Indian before. And I want to make something clear. You know, it's done in friendly competition, okay? I'm very pro motorsports. I'm very pro American motorcycles. I root for Harley-Davidson just like I root for the Los Angeles Lakers or I root for the Los Angeles Dodgers. You know, those are my teams. I'm Team Harley-Davidson. And I root against Indian just like I would the Yankees or the Celtics, right? So it's, you know, it's all in friendly competition. And like Nick said, I've really enjoyed the competition with Moto America, King of the Baggers, in the last 4 years or however long they've been doing it. And I hope that, is it Carolwood, that the private equity company?
Carolwood LP.
Carolwood LP is the name of the private equity company that purchased Indian. And we don't even really know for how much exactly. And I guess Polaris is still retaining a percentage of that as well. But Carolwood bought the majority share of it. But my point is, I hope that they continue with the racing program. A lot of times when people are trying to cut corners and be more agile, a lot of times racing is cut, you know. Yeah. So hopefully, that's one thing I think that maybe we can expect is for the racing to be cut, which is too bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and you kind of listed a couple of things there that are just kind of initially kind of important to cover. Is, you know, there's not a whole lot of information yet about the specifics of this. Indian has been separated off into its own company, and then the majority stake in that company has transferred from Polaris to Carolwood LP. But as you mentioned, we don't know for how much. You know, Harley-Davidson has sold companies in the past, and sometimes it's sold and given away for $1 essentially, and saying, hey, you get all these assets, but you also get all the debt. So right. Sometimes things are sold for no money, essentially, right? I'm not saying that's what happened here, but like without knowing the specifics of the deal, it's very difficult to make any real assessment of the transaction itself and what it means. But yeah, it was sold to Carolwood LP, which is a private equity firm. Most people hear private equity and they go, oh, that's bad. They're going to part this thing out, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't necessarily always happen. In fact, even within the larger motorcycle industry, there was a point in time where Ducati was actually owned by private equity in the early 2000s. Sense has had its own renaissance, multiple MotoGP titles at this point, highly successful brand under the Volkswagen ownership group. So it's not necessarily doom and gloom entirely, right? But you do have to take a step back. And so one of the first things I wanted to do when I heard the news, past my initial reaction, was I just wanted to look into Polaris's financials, because that's going to give you at least more information than what the flowery press releases are going to be. And, you know, if you look at their 2024 statements, Indian was not, and they call it their on-road segment, which technically includes more than just Indian, but it's mostly Indian. Their on-road segment had shrunk double digits, which is obviously not good, but not wholly out of line with the general industry as well. Motorcycles as a whole are just not doing well right now in the U.S.
I'm glad you said that, because let's be fair. I mean, being fair, a lot of the motorcycle world is kind of declining right now.
Exactly.
You can blame it on the economy, or you can blame it on people not being into motorcycles as much, whatever you want to blame it on. The fact that it is, everyone's kind of down right now.
Yeah. So this isn't unique to Polaris or unique to Indian, and doesn't necessarily say that what they were doing was right or wrong. The industry as a whole is not doing well. So you look in 2024, they're posting specifically naming Indian shipments as being lower than what they had hoped. And then in 2025, Polaris as a whole starts posting losses, and ultimately actually has to, on their own books, devalue Indian as an asset. Ultimately now we hear the news of it being sold. So that doesn't paint a rosy picture for what was going on within internally within Polaris regarding specifically Indian, but it doesn't tell the whole story. It's still, these are just still pieces of a puzzle that we're going to see more of in the future. It's, like I said, not something that makes me super, super optimistic, but the results are always something that you find out later on down the line. It's nothing that you can predict the future of.
Yeah, and I think, everyone tries to remain positive in the press release and the new leadership in Indian motorcycles. They got the new CEO, Mike Kennedy, that's been in the industry for a long time. He's worked at Harley-Davidson for the majority of his career. So, a lot of people have faith in him, but, everyone tries to paint a rosy picture when, if you look at the financials a little bit closer, I mean, this isn't a move that was brought upon by, everything's going great. I think this private equity company is going to make it even better. There's financial issues going on behind the scenes, right? It represented, Indian motorcycles represented about 7% of the total volume, I think, gross revenue of Polaris. Polaris has said in their statement that they're going to they're going to sell it so that they can focus assets and resources on their core products, side-by-sides, watercraft, and things like that. So I think if everything was going great, they probably would still have Indian motorcycles, right? So, they sold it, and, hopefully this private equity company can really hone in and focus on, being more nimble, agile, whatever you want to call it, and come up with some cool products. And I think that's kind of a segue into our next topic. I've been really critical over the years about Indian existing as basically, copying everything Harley-Davidson does. And I use the word copy lightly, but you can literally go down every single one of Harley-Davidson's models and you can be like, okay, Indian's version of that is this. Indian's version of the Lowrider ST is the Chief Sport RT, I think is the latest one that they've copied, So we're not going to get into that too much, but I think my point is that it would be really cool to see Indian, now that they've broken away from Polaris, who had pretty much the exact same business model when they had Victory motorcycles, just copy Harley-Davidson. Hopefully now they can do something unique to Indian, true to their roots.
Yeah, and that's something I hope for too. The reality is that it's funny. You hear a lot of the criticisms of the motor company, right? That they're building bikes for boomers who are aging out of the motorcycle, environment, right? That this is an expensive product with a shrinking product pool. Like, there's a lot of general criticism of the motor company around some of those things. So it always seemed weird to me that another major manufacturer would try to break into this product segment that is supposedly shrinking, contracting, and is doomed, that people like to throw that stuff around. And it's like, okay, well, do I want to try to carve out a piece of a ever shrinking pie, which seemed to be what their business model was. And I kind of think it was somewhat doomed. The thing that scares me is that one of their few bikes that kind of stood out as not really having a really core direct competitor from Harley-Davidson, the FTR, is one of the few bikes that's currently getting axed. And that's kind of a shame, because that was one of the few bikes that they made that I really felt like distinguished itself from anything in Harley's product segment. And that's going to be gone. So, there are ways in which private equity can try to secure a bunch of additional cash. I think that one of the things that always was weird to me watching a lot of the videos about this breakup was that people were like, well, now Indian's going to be unchained. And I'm like, I don't like, I was looking at Polaris's financials, and like in the first 6 months of this year, they've spent like $180 million on R&D, like $180 million according to their own documentation. Like, I don't think that people have an appropriate understanding for how expensive it is to develop new things. And I'm sure a vast majority of that was for side-by-sides and stuff.
They'll be unchained with no money, Nick.
Yeah. But they're like, oh, they had to go to Harley to get approval and it's all this bureaucracy. Like, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But like, that's the kind of stuff that comes with really deep pockets, right? You don't end up with really deep pockets unless there is a lot of bureaucracy usually to, guard that giant pile of cash you have.
Yeah.
And so what worries me now is that what private equity tends to do is they tend to take whatever assets you have and leverage them extremely highly to try to get a cash influx. But what you do with that cash, and also there's just a lot of variables. We don't know how much assets Indian was given when it was divided off, if it was given and saddled with a bunch of debt and then transferred to them for $1. Yeah. We don't know what the deals were specifically, so it's very difficult to predict. But there is this hypothetical world where they take out a bunch of money against the assets that Indian has and then invest very heavily into maybe building a naked sport bike, maybe building an ADV bike, entering the fastest growing product segments, as Stefan will be very happy to hear us reference. And maybe they'll do that, right? Because there are some product segments that are surviving better than others in the U.S. market. And to see them specifically target those would be cool. But as you and I both know from interacting with people within the motor company, it takes years upon years. Even speed running a clean slate design is going to take you 3 or 4 years to get it to market.
Yeah.
So can Carolwood float Indian 3 or 4 years to get a bunch of these other products out there, that are in these product categories that are hopefully doing better? I don't know. It's just one of those things that makes me nervous. Like, does a private equity firm look at a contracting market and a business that has been doing poorly and whose previous owner said outlook poor, right? When they shook their magic 8 ball, and then say, let's invest a huge amount of money in this, right? It just seems like something they wouldn't do, but I'm not a private equity guy.
Yeah, well, Carolwood says, and I quote, they're going to take the fight to its biggest competitor, Harley-Davidson. So they say they're going to take the fight to Harley-Davidson. So I think that means that they're going to be building bikes to compete directly with Harley-Davidson is what I read from that. That's what I get from that. So
yeah. Is that different than what's going on now? Are they accusing Polaris of not doing that? I feel like that's all Polaris has been doing for 10 years.
And I agree with that for sure. So I don't know if they're going to amp that up, turn the volume up, put more gas on it or what. And to me, that only means, coming out with some new cool products. I don't know. How else do you compete?
I think that's the only thing you can say, really. I mean, in the short term, what other options do you have? As you and I both know, you can't get anything to market that isn't a direct competitor to Harley unless you've already been designing it and building it. I doubt that Polaris was doing that, which means for the next 3 years, if you want to keep your lights on, you're selling stuff that competes with Harley because that's all you have anyways. It's not like you just flip a switch and all of a sudden you've got a dirt bike. You've got to design it, develop it, manufacture it, get all the tooling up in place. So at least in the short term, I mean, that's all they really can do, at least they're not saying, hey, we're going to flip the switch and turn the lights off. That's, but those are the only two options. Continue doing what you're doing in the short term, medium to short term, or literally sell everything off. So
they've said that they're going to be keeping their existing dealer network. There's going to be no disruption. If you're a current owner of an Indian motorcycle, there'd be no disruption in parts and service and sales. So you can just still go into your favorite Indian dealership and get those services. I wonder how that's going to affect dealerships though. Because, that's the customer-facing experience. When you walk into a dealership, what do you see on the floor? Who's greeting you? Are the dealerships able to hire enough staff because they're a profitable enough business? These are things that really affect the brand a lot. So will they be coming out with new products, new motorcycles every year that are getting that repeat buyer, or those guys that want to trade up and get the latest and greatest Indian? That's yet to be seen, so we'll see. And, I will comment too, and I posted this on my Instagram, when Polaris dumped Victory back in 2016, 15, something like that. The Victory motorcycles immediately plummeted in value, and it was extremely hard for Victory owners to get parts and service anywhere. Will that happen with Indian? Probably not like that as drastically, but maybe, who knows? And so it's tough when you're an owner and then all of a sudden it's such a big shift in ownership like this. How is that going to affect my motorcycle? Because, just speaking from it, and this isn't my opinion, this is fact. You look at the auction prices on Victory motorcycles and they immediately drop down significantly. And when we take trade-ins like victories, we look at what market values are, and we call dealerships around us and say, hey, how much is this bike worth? I'm taking it on trade. And when dealers say, Indian dealers say, we don't even want that bike, or we can give, 20% of the original MSRP when it's only a few years old, then it's like that really damages the value and the equity that you have in your investment that you made. So these are things to be aware of.
Yeah, and it's a chicken and the egg kind of problem too when it comes to like dealership networks. It's very, very difficult and expensive to build out that network, but without that network, it's very, very difficult to get people to buy into your brand. Opening and starting a dealership is immensely expensive. If there isn't a good, chance of a significant return on that, that means you're trying to probably work your way into existing dealers, but that's not what Harley customers are used to. They're used to standalone dealerships, and those are expensive to run and expensive to start up, and just a risky business to go into when the market's contracting. So,
yeah,
I think I always just go back to what Polaris had written in their own financial statements, which was that they expected a really few hard years ahead for Indian, basically no matter what. And I don't see how selling to another company makes any of that better or easier, personally. It's a shame too, and it makes it tough too for customers because, if you want to go buy a bike right now, it's just, you want that company to still be there in 5 years. And this definitely doesn't scream, you can be really confident that they will be. Any company can go out of business, but one that's recently been sold, it's just, that's the first thing on everyone's mind at that point is, what's the long-term, position of this brand?
Yeah.
So,
the only thing I really care about is the racing. Indian, stick around. We want to still race. I think that's honestly the King of the Baggers has been one of the coolest things that's come about in the last decade in terms of just, revitalizing that rivalry that Harley-Davidson and Indian has had since 1909, 1910 is when they first started racing, something like that. Nothing is cooler than American V-twin racing, in my opinion. So hopefully we can keep that going. Harley just signed this big MotoGP thing where they're going to be, it's probably going to be more of an exhibition race, it seems. I don't know what it's going to be exactly.
I'd love to have seen the inside of that negotiations, and I have to believe that, MotoGP approached Dorna, the company that owns that, approached Polaris and said, hey, we'd like to get some of this racing over there, and that maybe just probably because of what's going on now that maybe they declined because they didn't really want to expend all that extra money on what is going to be a very expensive endeavor. I really hope that, like you said, that the racing continues. I'm optimistic in some ways that it might, because I do think that of their product segments, I think that the Power Plus baggers have been probably one of their more successful, more expensive products, right? And then I think that the Scout lineup has probably been their most successful product overall. But outside of that, I think probably would be, my guess would be the Power Plus line of bikes. And because they distinguish themselves enough from Harley's baggers in certain key ways that I think that they can attract certain buyers with those. And so I hope that in their mind justifies continue racing, because, if you're saying that you're the performance alternative and then you stop racing, that always looks bad. So I'm hoping that because of that, they continue.
Maybe they just support privateers or something like that. The guys that are going to be racing that want to ride an Indian, maybe they support them with bikes and parts, and they'll have a factory team. I don't know.
They picked up some good riders, some talented Europeans and Australians, so they seemed serious there. But I will say in the second half of the season, it didn't look like they were increasing their development of the bike in the way that Harley was.
Right.
It seemed kind of like Harley was pulling away. And it was able to just kind of manage a lead there. So I don't know if that was because of lack of development. You never really know with racing. Racing's tough. Racing, you could be trying as hard as you possibly can and still be at the back of the grid. You could be dumping money into racing and still be losing. So that's
it's a competitive world.
It is and a very brutal, punishing one. So I hope that they choose very specific product lines that they continue to develop well and invest in and stay competitive in, and then are able to grow the business to something that's a little bit more profitable and healthy 5-10 years from now. That way current Indian owners are not burned by a company going out of business, and the current employees are not burned by losing their job. Nobody wants that. And that, fans of the industry as a whole that enjoy racing and enjoy just better bikes, we're not burned because more competition is typically good. So, that's what I hope for. I think that's their most likely path to success is the corporate speak. make it more nimble, you know, cut the fat kind of thing, and weather the storm, and try to grow a successful, you know, niche.
I hope they come out with some new cool stuff, you know. Yeah. Hopefully they take this opportunity to really give Indian its own identity and come out with some cool bikes that people can say, wow, that was very ingenuitive of Indian and the designers and the engineering team to come up with that motorcycle. And that's unmistakably Indian. Do something new and cool that you can say, wow, that really was Indian doing that. And I think that would get everybody excited, right?
Yeah. To plug my channel, you know, I have a video that kind of addresses that a little bit, where I talk about the fact that, Indian doesn't have a bike outside of the now dead FTR in a product segment that Harley doesn't already exist in. And gonna
link that video in the upper right hand corner here too, guys.
I also do a little bit of a dive on the transaction between Polaris and Carolwood as well. But it's just upsetting because Indian has a rich history. They've inline 4 bikes, you know, from 100 years ago, basically. Why don't they have a sport bike? Why don't they have a dirt bike? Why don't they there's no rules saying that they can't go compete with KTM, right? There's no rules saying they can't build a V4 sport bike to go compete with Ducati. But for whatever reason, they see themselves as kind of just an alternative to Harley. That's all they've really ever seen themselves as. And that's kind of a shame because I wish that there was more variety in the American motorcycle market. You know, I'm a big proponent of the Pan Am. I a lot of those teased Rev Max, bikes that Harley has shown over the years and or have been leaked. I've always been like, oh, those look cool, man. Those look wild, right? The VR 1000 from the AMA era, sport bike. I've owned Buells, you know, so all that kind of, you know, cool stuff. I'm a big fan of it. And so I'd love for Indian to build stuff like that. But yeah, for whatever reason, they didn't. Maybe Carolwood will take out massive loans against that stuff in Minnesota, and we'll start seeing some bikes on the Superbike grid.
Yeah, you know? That'd be cool. All right, guys. Well, let us know your thoughts. You know, what's your opinion on this whole move by Indian? And let us know what you think the future holds for Indian motorcycles. Yeah, I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Later.
Troy Harfoss has come over from Australia as a Superbike champion and has really taken this series by storm.
Troy Harfoss going the fastest lap. What an impact he has had on the Mission King of the Bagger Championship. On the gas he goes, checkered flag waving, and it's going to be Troy Harfoss who takes the win. Oh, and there he goes. Wow. Unbelievable. Troy Harfoss takes the checkered flag and the win. This has been a storybook race.